The PlayStation VR2, Sony's next-gen VR headset, is here next month. But how did Sony begin their VR journey? Well, the funny thing about this is that it didn't really begin in VR. Sony's journey began in building futuristic-looking head-mounted displays like the Glastron, looking like your typical video game goggles, boasting 800x600 resolution, which although resembled a modern VR headset, it was just a cool way to view a big screen TV in front of your eyes. Long story short, it didn't do well, but Sony continued forward. By this time, Sony had released the PlayStation 1 in 1994. This put Sony on the gaming map, but Sony still had this obsession with building these VR-looking cinema goggle displays, so they released a successor to the Glastron, the Glastron, which had a 52-inch screen and had real VR applications. But even with this, we had another failed product on our hands, even if Sony did try to market the hell out of it. Firstly, it was expensive, starting at $900, eventually rising to $1,400 at one point. Secondly, VR in general was niche and seemingly dying. Whilst it had VR applications, it was clear it was still aimed more towards bringing the cinema to you as opposed to immersing yourself in these fantastical worlds. But Sony did touch on some of these aspects in a bit more detail, as it was compatible with some games such as the PC robot simulation game MechWarrior 2, which put you in a cockpit view, allowing a much more immersive experience, but it just didn't catch on. Overall, the Glastron lasted 5 years, but Sony, possessed by the VR gods themselves, still decided to move forward with their VR ambition. With the massive success of the PlayStation 1, Sony released the PlayStation 2 in the year 2000, and along this, they decided the ingenious idea of bringing VR to the PlayStation 2. They named this next VR device none other than PUD J5A. Sounds like a pudding. And there was no catchy name like the Glastron. However, it does show that Sony have been trying to link their VR devices with their computer-based systems for a long time now. Anywho, it was released in 2002 in online stores purely for the Japanese market, priced at $530 with the video glasses trend following suit like the Glastron. It was connected directly to the PlayStation 2 and came with 6 or so VR-focused games. Despite all this, once again, the PUD J5A was a commercial failure. Bruh. Firstly, it didn't help that there was not much variation in terms of the games, which were mainly focused on flight simulations or roller coaster simulations, whilst there was one peculiar game which put you in a simulator of a photographer, which had you walking around checking out Japanese glamour models in any angle you want. Whilst there was also criticism over the resolution of the lenses and the restrictive horizontal only field of view. Now this isn't confirmed, but word around the block, Sony were just experimenting within R&D and they fumbled upon something, but they did not want to invest more into it, so thought, hey, let's try and make some money with it, and set it only online and in Japan only, hence why they didn't really push it internationally. So far, Sony's VR journey has not been fruitful, so it made sense that they decided to go into a VR hibernation. However, when they exited with the iToy, they finally got to win.
Very simple. The only other things you'll need are a console, a TV, and, yes, a player. Yes.
The iToy was released in 2003 in Europe and 2004 in the US and Japan, and the later released PlayStation I came out in 2007. They were both digital camera add-ons for the PlayStation 2 and PS3, which was released in 2006 and allowed basic motion sensors and eventually AR. The key difference for Sony was Richard Mark was the head of Sony's Magical Labs virtual reality research and development wing. The PlayStation 2 being very powerful for its time, he showed that motion controls and MR could be achieved without high expenditure. Now the motion detection around this was not perfect, but it was the list of the 3 simple party games which worked well enough to really drive its success. And with new vigour, Sony was able to push forward for the next project, which was the PlayStation Move. The PlayStation Move was released in 2010 and operated like the Nintendo Wii remotes and would eventually become central to Sony's VR movement, with 3D tracking being experimented before with the iToy, which basically utilised a simple method of tracking a coloured lit orb compared to the infrared bar method used by the Wii and Kinect. Sony had found a design which was basically a light gun, but in reverse. And the crazy thing about all this is that this idea was actually dropped as Sony wanted to focus on the iToy initially, but due to the huge sales of the Nintendo Wii in 2008, it resurfaced. Sony grabbed the orb technology and combined it with a better version of the PlayStation Eye and included inertia sensors, which would eventually become the PlayStation Move. It was so well received and offered better motion controls than the Nintendo Wii. Even with all this, it didn't do too well. Now look, although games like Resident Evil 5 and Dead Space were released, Sony didn't fully utilise the IPs unlike Nintendo, which was filled with Mario and Zelda. It just seemed like Sony was chasing Nintendo's shadow on a market they had a full grasp on. So what did Sony do? 1 year later in 2011, Sony released the HMZ T1. The device included a head unit with one OLED display per eye, and once again, it could connect to the PlayStation 3. This was to emulate viewing a whopping 750 feet IMAX screen from 20 feet away. Whoa, wait a second. What is with Sony and these cinema focus goggles? Again, Sony, like, it didn't work before. Wait, what? This one was actually impressive? Well, it did deliver the big screen experience when playing these games. Only negative thing about this series was the price at £700 for a luxury item. Plus, the headset was a bit heavy, so it could not be worn for long duration. generation. Over the next 3 years, Sony refined the template, releasing the TZ and T3 in quick succession, but they still couldn't captivate the public, and eventually Sony pulled the product in 2015, pushing all its resources towards the VR division. And boy, was this a good decision. Time for a familiar face. Project Morphers, which was named after the big man himself from the Matrix, was announced in 2014 and was released as the PlayStation VR in October 2016. It was a comfortable, slick, futuristic headset that plugged straight into your PlayStation 4, which finally allowed you to immerse yourself in 360 game worlds. It was not as powerful as the Vive or the Rift at the time, but was impressive enough, using a 1080 screen with a 120Hz refresh rate. Shuhei Yoshida, president of Sony Worldwide Studios, coined the VR headset as the cornerstone mark of the Sony brand. And with Oculus gaining traction, people saw this as the VR race coming to life. Sony finally had a commercially selling VR headset, selling over 5 million copies by 2020. The tech was there and it finally had a vast library of games such as Resident Evil 7, Super Hot Nova, Blood and Truth, Beat Saber, Wipeout. It's continued to gain support from Sony and even has a strong VR community still to this day. So what's next? Don't be silly. It's this guy. The PlayStation VR2 is the next in line for Sony. It is Sony's flagship model, which is currently the most powerful consumer-based VR headset on the market. There is finger tracking, eye tracking, 2K resolution per eye, resulting in a 4K res in total, haptic feedback in the controllers and headset, and they can offer you a PC VR type experience by just utilizing that bad boy there. The next few years are going to be exciting for sure, and hopefully today's video sheds some heritage on Sony's VR journey. Sony's been there. They've had the trial and error, and it shows that VR has been on their peripheral vision for a long time now. It wasn't like one day they woke up and was like, hey, let's do VR. Okay. Nah. So this gives me a mixture of belief and definitely a bit of hopium. And as always guys, if you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button. It's totally free, I promise. And of course, do hit that subscribe button for more future VR content. And I'll see all of you guys next video.